coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way podcast. I'm Laura.
And I'm Kate. And this week, we're back to school again for a discussion about Rory's choice to go to Yale. The breadcrumbs are dropped early about Richard being a Yale man, and Lorelai wanting Rory to be her own man by going to Harvard. As a Yale legacy, Rory has a real leg up in the admissions process, and it puts a lot of pressure on her to make a decision about her future, which drives a lot of the tension in season 2 and 3, so that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
But before we dive into it, this is your friendly reminder that this is a spoilers all podcast. We will be talking about anything and everything from the show. So if you haven't seen it, go back and binge it and then come back and join us so that we don't have to hear you complain about how we ruin things for you. Also, please just remember to do all of those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It is one click and it really helps us out. Share it with any of your GG friends who you know might want more content as well. And this is just a casual disclaimer because it is ongoing as we are starting this recording that you may hear cat noises in the background. There is a frequent podcast visitor lately who just chooses recording times to get the zoomies. We can't control it, but we kind of just need to go with the flow. So it is what it is, folks. If you hear noises, that's what it is. He might make an appearance. That's really up to him. But we're pro felines on this podcast. So thumbs up for that as well.
Yeah, we were waiting for him to chill for like 10 minutes and it wasn't happening even with food. So we're like, we just have to get started because we have things to do. So that's where we're at. But yeah, and you know, we have a cat at your place and I've got my Handsome Dan sweater on and I've got my Copper Boom mug. So mentally I'm at Yale and it's, you know, it's the first week of September. The air is about to get crisp again. The leaves will be turning soon. It's just my favorite time of year. So let's go back to school for a little while. Whether we're actually going back to school or not, let's pretend because it's my happy place. So yeah, we've done a few episodes about Rory's academic journey, and we'll almost certainly do more next year. But this one is about her choice of Yale, what went into it, issues with legacies at Ivy's, etc. We touched on it briefly in our university experiences episode, but it kind of warrants its own full treatment now. And we have a few Ivy legacies on the show. We have Rory, Paris, Richard, and Logan. So we'll talk about each of them in turn as we go through this. And, you know, something I said in the previous episode, oh my God, it was a year ago now, like what it even is time, but is how being a legacy, there's a desire to be part of something bigger. You're being a part of history. You're sharing memories and experiences with loved ones who have done the same thing before you. And it inspires a real sense of community. It inspires continued participation with the university. Like, look at Richard going back to Yale every year for the Harvard-Yale game. It's about connecting kids to their family legacy, which is something Lorelai didn't really appreciate because she didn't really feel the same way as Rory did about wanting to be connected to the Gilmore name. And there was nothing wrong with Rory wanting to have that kind of connection with her grandfather's history or the Gilmore history because her great-grandfather also went to Yale. So we love that she ultimately made a decision that was best for herself based on her own values of connection to her family instead of letting her mom's feelings dampen that and cause her to miss out on it. And yeah, so we also talked about, like, you told a story about a mom. Originally you said she was Ole Miss, but turns out she was Bama. And her son, her son, she expected him to choose Bama as well, or hoped that he would choose Bama, and he ended up choosing the Gators. So why don't you kind of like tell us about that, and maybe like, do you have any updated thoughts on that situation or anything that sort of connects back to this whole conversation?
Yeah, I mean, my viewpoints on it are pretty much still exactly the same as when I first found out about it and brought it up. Here was a young man who was a wide receiver choosing which college he wanted to accept a scholarship to. he had a couple of choices. I think he had narrowed it down to 3 schools that had made him like top tier offers. It was Tennessee, it was Alabama, and it was Florida. And he is he was like one of the top 40, I think, athletes within the United States. So ESPN was broadcasting live. They were monitoring and following his decision. So he was sitting at a table next to his siblings. His mother, what looked like was probably his grandmother, and then just a couple of other friends and just supporters. And he indicated and picked up the hat for the Florida Gators and said, like, this is the college that I'm choosing. This is the school that I'm going to commit to. I want to attend here. And the very second that he did it, his mother stood up from the table and immediately just walked off camera and out of this press conference without even giving him a word, a glance, nothing. And you could instantly see that this young man was just immediately distraught over the lack of support from his own mom. And he had to continue on with his press conference. I think there were some school faculty members or people that were there who stepped in and sat next to him just to like pat him on the shoulder and help him get through it. But he was just very upset in that moment. And so my viewpoints are still the same with that. You need to support your child with the decisions that they're going to make in terms of where they want their continuing education to happen. This young man obviously felt that for whatever reason, Florida was going to be the best school for him to attend. Now, obviously, his family has some extensive background with Alabama, but you need to put that aside and, again, just make it about what your kid wants at that point in time. But they were just so immediately dismissive of it, and it probably is leaving this young man with some lasting scars and some residual emotional effects that he's going to have to contend with. It's not okay for that mother to do it to her son. It's not okay for any parent to do that to a child and place expectations on them that I went here, your grandfather went here, your great-great-grandfather went here. This is what's expected of you. We see a lot of it in Gilmore Girls, and we'll talk about it as well, and why it is so problematic. But what it boils down to is really just trusting your children to make their own choices, follow their own path, and supporting them 1,000% with that decision, no matter what it ends up being, even if it's not what you want for them. We'll talk about it with Richard, with Lorelai, with their reactions to it as well. But at the end of the day, stand behind your kid and trust that they're making the choice that is right for them, even if it's not what you want.
Right. There's a lot of pressure on kids, and it's put on them early to go along with that family legacy. And there's maybe not as much talk about what happens when that isn't the case, when kids do decide to do something else. And that was a very public example of it. And it's really unfortunate that people can't set aside their own feelings and recognize this for what it is, which is a great accomplishment. And, recognizing your child's identity and autonomy as being entirely their own instead of just an extension of your own legacy. So, yeah. Lorelai eventually got on board with taking up the legacy, but at first she was kind of against it. She wanted Rory to go to Harvard. We hear that in the early episodes. We have her talking to Max, telling her that ever since Rory could crawl, Lorelai wanted her to go to Harvard. And then by the end of that same episode, when Rory is struggling academically, she's like, how did that even start? Did it start with me? Did it start with you? Was it my dream for you to go to Harvard? Because I never got to do the big fancy college thing. Maybe all this time I'm thinking it's for Rory when really it wasn't. And so she has to contend with that within herself. Rory says, no, this is exactly what I want. Regardless of how it started, I swear this is what I want. And she continues to push for it. But then by the end of season 1, we get Trix come in. And she says, how could you let this child go to Harvard? Richard, you're a Yale man. Your father was a Yale man. And I just love Lorelai's retort. Well, we want Rory to be whatever kind of man she wants to be, which is true. but a little hypocritical in her because she was the one saying, I really wanted her to go to Harvard. So where did that come from? You. You don't want her to be whatever kind of man she wants to be. You want her to be what you want her to be, or you want her to follow the path that you anticipate for her. So just saying. But I'm actually kind of proud of Emily and Richard in that moment, especially Richard. But they held Trix off. And they were bragging about Rory aiming at Harvard, regardless of whether or not it was Richard's alma mater. They were just so proud of Rory's academic attainment. And they were like, chill out, Trix. Don't make a big deal out of this. It's too early, too soon. Doesn't matter. We're proud of her regardless.
Yeah, but it was short-lived because we eventually get to that point in time where Richard, pulls a fast one and gets Rory a surprise interview with the dean of admissions for Yale. Hey, guess what, kid? He's seeing you in 30 seconds. Good luck.
Oh, look, it's 3:00 now. Good luck.
Surprise. Who would have thought?
Lorelai.
Yes.
She saw it coming.
I saw the writing on the wall in the Jeep. I wanted to go back into the house to divert the crisis. And then Rory even says down the line, oh, I should have not listened to you. And Lorelai says, she's like, even I could not have foreseen that happening. I knew Richard was probably trying to do some dirty undertaking Yale work here. But that was next level in terms of the underhandedness to it. So, it's funny, but not funny at the same time. But Rory has a very good response to it. She says to Richard, listen, if you had asked me to do that, and I knew that it meant a lot to you, I would have said yes for that reason. But you could have given me more time to prepare, to have my transcripts ready, to have my, recommendations ready to go so that I didn't feel like I was being thrown to the wolves with this interview. This is the dean of admissions for Yale, not for, the middle of Nebraska, nowhere university. And no discredit to the middle clump states. We love them too.
I was going to say, no offense, Nebraska. Ouch.
Yeah. We just lost some Nebraska viewers. No, we love you. But her point is well taken. I could have been prepared and ready for this if you had just asked me, hey, is this something that you would consider doing? And I would have said yes instead of feeling so blindsided by it. So I can understand her and Lorelai and even Emily's response as if to just, say, no, Richard, 1,000% wrong. We're out of here. That was a grievous, grievous error. And it could have actually cost Rory potentially an opportunity. Thankfully, she did seem to wow the dean of admissions with the few minutes that she had. But had that interview gone badly, perhaps even Richard's legacy or the fact that he's an alumni at that point in time wouldn't have even been enough to save Rory from the dean of admissions being like, I'm not really impressed. I was actually a crapshoot interview. I don't think this person is right for our school. If the application comes across the desk, I don't even think we should consider it. It could have just backfired in the worst way as well. So there was a lot that was problematic with that. I just have a lot of thoughts. Stop me here.
Yeah, sometimes legacies who are not quite as competitive still get in, though, especially with large endowments and donations. So, it might not have sunk her, especially considering she apparently finished with a 4.2 and valedictorian and all of those other things might have rounded out her application in such a way that an interview that wasn't 100% on point but still passable wouldn't be enough to tank her. So I still agree that he should have prepared her for that and should have known that Rory is not Lorelai, no matter how much influence Lorelai has over Rory, and that Rory probably would do something like that just to make him happy. And also because Chilton would probably make her. Let's be real. She can't just apply to Harvard. And Yale is right on par with it. And so it only makes sense for those to be her main aims. So if he had approached this differently, it would have been a lot better. But even in season 2, we have Lorelai getting her hackles up with him already before this even happens. When he visits them in Stars Hollow, and he said, "You shouldn't maybe get so settled on one college quite so soon. She's young. She hasn't investigated her options, and she only wants to go to Harvard because she thinks you want her to go to Harvard." And I think Rory should explore Yale. I can make some phone calls. I can set up an appointment. And Lorelai just pushes him and pushes him and pushes him and says, you know, I don't want you to do that. I don't want Rory to get in off of your connections. And she doesn't listen to him when he says, this isn't about you, it's about Rory. She just thinks it's him trying to interfere. And she goes right back to that same posture when they're at Yale. And she said to her mom, every time I have a communication error with dad, I wonder why we can't just figure it out. And then he does something like this. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's why. So she already has this defensive stance about it. And she lets it cloud her vision. She lets it ruin Thanksgiving dinner when she finds out Rory actually did apply. And she freaks out and embarrasses everybody in front of guests. And has to tell Rory, I just wish that, I could convince myself that everything's going to be okay, that, every time my parents get their hands on anything, that things will be fine. But it's hard for me to reconcile that. And Rory is the one who has to do the emotional management with her mom in that moment, where she's like, are you mad? That is so awful, to feel like you're angering your mother because you're trying to keep your options open and you're open to the idea of going to the same school as your grandfather. That it's just, for me, it's one of Lorelai's worst. It's not even just one moment either. It's sort of a pattern of moments around Rory's school choice. But it's some of her worst moments are wrapped up in resisting Yale, when her entire ethos with Rory is generally, I let her do what she wants because she's smart and she's capable and I trust her. And so why can't you do that here? Why can't you say, hey, let's go check out a bunch of stuff. Let's look at a number of different schools. Maybe Harvard isn't the right place. Maybe we picked one arbitrarily and it's not actually the best place for you. Maybe we should actually do some research. But no, it's just too much for them.
Yeah, but I even thought too that Lorelai might have been a little bit more understanding, because when we get to the end of Let the Games Begin, like, I love how that episode finishes off with Rory and Lorelai back in their respective rooms, just both leafing through a Yale pamphlet at that point in time. And so we see the writing on the wall that, like, okay, Rory's not only considering Harvard anymore, which is a step in the right direction. I feel like for anyone approaching college or university, if you want to have like a goal in mind for, like, yes, this is my number one school, this is what I'm aiming for, that's great. But you should always have backups and other considerations, and don't just make it all about one place or one university. Otherwise, like, why go anywhere else? So I thought it was really just great to see Rory being a little more open-minded to other universities, specifically Yale at that point in time. But I would have expected more from Lorelai as well, because she's also leafing through this pamphlet now as if to say, like, well, how would I feel about this? Like, would I still be on board with this if this is what Rory ends up choosing? Now that this is an option that's been presented and on the table, how would I feel about that? And they both start investigating and looking into the school a little bit further. So it makes me still really a bit shocked that Lorelai is still having so much backlash, even just over, not even I got in and I'm 1,000% going here, just over the fact that, like, I filled out and sent in an application, and she's just having this knee-jerk reaction. I expected more from Lorelai in that moment in terms of support. Echoing what you said, she's always been about, like, you do you, honey. Like, you do what's best for you, and I'm going to support you every single step of the way, except with Harvard.
Yeah, it's almost like she it's like Harvard is an exception to the rule. wants Rory to do what Rory wants to do, but when it comes to Harvard, that's where she draws the line. And it's strange because she doesn't really act like that with almost anything else. She even backs off with the boyfriends. I mean, she gets in some sideways jabs every so often just to make her feelings somewhat known, but she tries not to exert too much control. But when it comes to Harvard, there's just something about her feelings about that and being unable to overcome any hesitations about other options, especially Yale, because she thinks it's about her parents trying to control Rory and control her. It's such a bizarre thing because it kind of goes against every other behavior and belief she espouses about Rory's whole future. It's weird. I'm having a hard time even wrapping my head around her justifications for these things. But there's clearly a lot of history there for her. I think to the moment when Rory and Richard are sitting on the park bench while Emily and Lorelai are fixing Emily's skirt. What rhymes with Nantucket? And Rory says she's having a nice day, and Richard says it's nice to be able to show this place to another Gilmore generation. One day when your mother was 10 years old, she ran into my office and she said, "I'm going to Yale, just like you." She actually took my diploma out of my office and put it in her room. She wouldn't give it back to me for about 6 months. This place makes you remember things, hopefully things you're being graded on. And so it feels like Lorelai has these memories of maybe Yale being pushed on her, and she doesn't want that same thing to happen to Rory. But she doesn't recognize that in pushing it against Yale, she's just gone too hard in another direction and created the same phenomena where Rory feels this pressure to stay on the path that her mom wants for her. And she doesn't recognize what's happening here, that her feelings and her opinions are deeply impacting Rory's ability to think for herself and make her own decisions.
Yeah, I agree. And it still is so singular to Harvard too. Like, I can understand you're bucking at the fact that like you don't want your daughter to go to Yale because it just falls in line with what Richard Gilmore wants for her. But we've talked about this before. Why not Columbia? Why not Penn? Why not Princeton? Why not UMass? Like, even Georgetown. There are so many great other schools out there that she could have considered, but she was just so dialed in with Rory's going to Harvard. It's been decided. Does not involve you. You don't have a say. This is between Rory and I. And that's wrong too, because it's not between you and Rory. It's Rory herself who needs to and has to make this decision for what she is going to feel is best for her. Now, you need to put your familial issues aside, address that in some other way, perhaps one-on-one with Richard or in ding 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 therapy. But regardless of what Rory chooses, just support her. And it should be about the fact that, like, yes, you and Richard and Emily are very much invested in making sure that Rory gets the best education and jumpstart to life that she can get. It may not be Harvard. It may not be Yale. Like, who knows? Maybe she could have gone off to a school in California. Whatever it would have been, Lorelai needed to do better with just putting aside her own issues, her own prejudices, and just really having Rory's back. And it's just a glaring red flag for me that she didn't.
Yeah, her mom says it to her on the patio at Thanksgiving. You can't let her have one piece of our lives. You hate us that much. It's just this, as you said, knee-jerk reaction to the idea that Rory wants to move closer to them and she wants her to move further away and to not be swept up or beholden to them in any way, shape, or form. And it causes this very visceral, illogical, irrational reaction out of her. And it takes a long time for her to eventually come around. But obviously, we know how it turns out. Go Bulldogs, She eventually does choose Yale, and Lorelai gets on board. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. I love that moment in Tale of Pose and Fire, where Lorelai's like, if it's right for you, it's really right for me. And the other thing that I've noticed as I've gone through the material for all of the the Yale stuff and the education episodes is that they use a lot of we language. It's like, what school we want. It's Rory and I, and it's nobody else. And I don't want you to hate the school I'm going to. It's so enmeshed and it's gross. When I was making my university decisions, I wasn't even thinking about it. Nothing was put on me. No ideas, no pressures, no nothing. So perhaps that's a factor. But I made this choice to go across the country, and my family was nothing but like, sweet, we love that for you. So Rory should have been afforded the same latitude, but she was so concerned with what her mom felt and what she thought that she was scared to pursue her own desires. And I dislike that. But eventually, Lorelai got on board, and we got to Yale. And Rory mostly flourishes. She has her moments, but
dropping.
And then, yeah, that'll be a whole episode unto itself too. But then we see some moments of bonding between Lorelai, or sorry, well, technically her name's Lorelai, but we keep doing that. Rory and Richard, especially. The Harvard-Yale game is the first big example, which is one of my all-time favorite episodes. I just love it. I watched it earlier today. And, you know, he says that he selfishly wanted to, or he selfishly hoped that he could share this with his granddaughter one day, and he is really happy that they're here and that they're doing it. And I think that's nice. You know, he expresses it a few times, and we see it again in season 5 when Rory's really excited to show Anna around campus, and he's like, it's so exciting watching you at Yale. It was such a wonderful time for me. The people you meet there will stay with you for the rest of your life, mark my words. So he's so pleased to have her there, and she seems to love it. She eventually goes back. She doesn't transfer. She doesn't realize that Yale isn't the right fit or anything like that. But maybe let's move to talking about legacies a little more generally, because it's quite a hot button topic at the moment, especially in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling from Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, and a similar case against University of North Carolina. So that was a challenge to affirmative action policies. And the Supreme Court ended up ruling that they were unconstitutional. And so we're going to be seeing a change in how universities consider or don't consider race as part of the application process. And it's brought up questions about other types of preferential treatment in the admissions process, specifically legacies. The only ones I don't see them really targeting at the moment is athletes. You know, the US is still so much about their athletic prowess that you'll probably never touch their athletic recruitment and scholarships, regardless of the academic potential of those people and whether or not they're crowding out more deserving students. Just saying.
Yeah, specifically, I will say specifically college football. I feel like this country would burn if we ever attempted to like F around and find out. No, that's how we go down in actual flames, I think.
Yes,
but anyhow,
I
I do want to kind of revert us back to talking about what legacies are in general, because we've said that, yes, obviously Rory makes use of a Yale legacy, some privilege, you know, some connections with Richard. But I want to make sure that our audience and anyone who's listening understands what a legacy is, how universities use them in terms of perhaps even cherry picking students from an elite pool of applicants. So can you just start off by defining what a legacy is and how universities make use of them when they're getting applications from students?
I shall define legacy as Rory and Logan and Paris. It's someone who is given preference by an academic institution because they have alumni in their family who also went to that institution. So they have an existing familial relationship to that school. And schools have adopted this practice. Well, it started predominantly in the early 20th century for, let's say, anti-Semitic reasons. So won't touch that with a 39.5-foot pole. But it continued on throughout the last century or so. And the rationale behind it was mostly, one, it builds community, it's a bonding experience, it creates camaraderie among the students, and it keeps alumni connected to the schools as well when their own families continue to attend. And two, the other big component is money, donations, philanthropy. Rich people who went to schools, got great educations, moved up in the world, made a lot of money, are more likely to give money back to their alma mater if their kids go there. At least that's the premise, the justification for it. That may not entirely be true. There are plenty of schools who have really never used legacy admissions, like MIT, who say, we've never had a problem soliciting donations and receiving just as much money as everybody else. So it's kind of, neither here nor there. Maybe true in some situations and not true in others, and it all comes out in the wash. But about 3/4 of research universities and nearly all liberal arts colleges will grant legacy preference. So it's pretty widespread. Although in the last decade or so, a lot of schools have been dropping it willingly. So people are starting to reappraise this in light of things we've come to learn about ourselves as society, as a mirror is held up to us about how we make these decisions and how wealth inequality becomes entrenched. So it's really starting to pick up steam as a very controversial practice because it's, for example, in comparison to affirmative action, that is an affirmative way to increase diversity, whereas legacy applications is fairly well known to be something that does not foster diversity because most legacies are white, Protestant, educated at public schools, and come from wealthy families. So these kids who are legacies typically already have quite a bit of privilege, and then they're just given more privilege by being afforded entry into a very selective college because their parent went there or their grandparent went there.
Right, but what I think there is an argument to be made, and I'm going to play devil's advocate with everything you throw at me, just so you know. So get ready. But what about the student who just grows up actually being very scholarly, who has a just, wonderful, almost perfect GPA, great extracurriculars, and wants to go to this school of their own volition, regardless of familial history, because maybe it just has an excellent program or major that they want to pursue? Should we be judging that individual and saying, you're just too privileged, you should not be afforded this opportunity because it should go to somebody else, and be discrediting their own accomplishments and their own achievements? Should we be harping on the individual or just coming harsher or coming down more on the concept itself?
I don't think so. And when you say that you're going to play devil's advocate, I feel like I'm going to as well. I'm sort of middle of the road on this myself because I have some particular thoughts about education in America and wealth inequality in general. And I feel like targeting legacy admissions kind of is just a scapegoat for a larger problem that runs far deeper and further back than we give it credit for. It feels like an easy target, shall we say, to be like, let's just get rid of legacy admissions. That'll fix wealth inequality, as if that's true. Even the economists don't necessarily agree on that. There's quite a bit of disagreement with, how much it impacts the financial bottom line of institutions in the first place. And so, yeah, they could probably get rid of it and not see a huge financial hit. But to your question, Rory is a great example of that. Rory is the perfect Ivy League candidate. She has been working and achieving at the level that she needs to succeed at an Ivy League institution. And so her being a legacy was probably just one factor among many that got her into schools. And Emily makes the point to Lorelai in Let the Games Begin that if Yale wants Rory, it might make her more attractive to Harvard. And that tends to be true as well, where having a parent who went to any Ivy League institution still makes you a desirable candidate. And it often shows access to wealth, which shows an ability to access the resources to get you to an Ivy League in the first place, if that makes sense. You know, kids who come from privilege tend to be more qualified than their poorer counterparts because they have access to better education. You know, they have access to sports and other kinds of hobbies that make them targets, ideal targets for these fancy schools. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that kids with parents who went to Ivies are going to go to great schools because the values of education were always instilled in them. There were a lot of expectations placed on them, and they had the ability to do the kinds of things that get you into those schools in the first place. So I thought this was interesting. In admission data reviewed by the Daily Princetonian in 2023, the student newspaper found that legacy students had a higher GPA than non-legacy students, except at the highest income levels, and were more likely to go into nonprofit work after admission and less likely to go on to graduate school. So I thought that was interesting because it shows that there are people who come from privilege and who come from legacy who are just as capable academically as any other student who gets in on their own merits. But it's the highest income level where maybe that GPA starts to drop a little bit. And of course, it makes me think of Logan Huntsberger because, you know, does he really care exactly what his GPA is when he knows that he's got his future career on lockdown thanks to daddy?
Probably not. But it also poses the question of, to me at least, when we're letting students like Logan Huntsberger just strut into a university because of XYZ, legacy, privilege. Daddy probably wrote some very big checks in the past and or in the lead up to this. How much are we taking away from those other students who have equilateral GPAs, who from a merit standpoint deserve the same opportunity, but now there's no longer enough space for all of these kids because we've let in all of these privileged individuals using this legacy path. Now, should there be more of an acceptance of we need to put a percentage on it and say we should only take 50% legacy students, 50% merit-based students? You know, how does race factor in? Like you said, how does wealth and economic status factor in? Should universities be saying, yes, we're going to have this divide, but also now we're going to start looking at, we want to make sure that we have you know, an Asian American community, an African American community, Hispanic community. Should we be factoring that in? Or do we just need to say we need to get rid of all of this in general and just start looking at everything merit-based, toss everything else out the window?
I think that's what SFFA v. Harvard was getting at was, you know, it's unconstitutional to use race as a factor in decisions because race doesn't equate to merit in either direction, right? Whether it's white students, black students, Asian, Hispanic. And with affirmative action, you see a huge bump in admittance for black students, but Asian Americans and Hispanics don't enjoy the same level of access. That they're not as likely as legacies, athletes, and black students to get into school. And so there's an entire civil rights investigation into Harvard for practices that were seemingly discriminatory against Asians and Asian Americans. So I think what they were trying to get at with that is saying, hey, let's just get rid of all of it. But they didn't attack legacies in that particular case, although several states now want to bring in legislation abolishing it from their states, including Connecticut. Connecticut has a bill on the table for that. So maybe Yale will be forced to drop legacies. But one of the issues with that is that a lot of the people who are in key power positions benefited from legacy, wealth, privilege, whiteness, all of these things themselves. And that can provide legal and political barriers to actually making this change, because the people in power have no reason to change something that benefits them and their own family and what they can pass on to the next generation. So it's not as blind a process as we would like it to be. Unfortunately, that's just sort of the cruel, cold reality of this process. And yeah, it would be great to see it be more equal across the board, but each institution has its own institutional priorities. The admissions officers have things that they're looking for in students, and it's going to vary based on what their values are at that school. And nobody ever accused the Ivies of wanting diversity and equity.
No, certainly not. There's a lot of systemic issues there as well. That can be its own separate topic. So I'm not going to go off on that just at this moment in time. But we have, like you alluded to, seen a couple of schools over the past decade or so who have started just dropping their legacy programs, completely abolishing it, saying we're not going to use that anymore as a criteria for admissions. There is obviously some pros and cons to it that I think you can argue both sides. But I just want to ask you, Kate, do you think that all universities should be getting rid of this, or even specifically within the Ivy League institutions, is there an argument that you personally would make to keep the legacy programs around? And if so, why? What is the benefit to still having them in place?
The thing is that I don't think the legacy programs are the problem. They could keep them, they could get rid of them. I don't know how much of a difference it will make. As long as America has this wealth income gap and has these ideas about wealth and privilege and who can be in what spaces and what wealth says about you, how wealth equates to success, all of these things, people will somehow continue to find ways to buy themselves into positions of power, prestige, and privilege. So let's look at Logan, for example. Let's say Logan didn't want to go to Yale, and Mitchum was like, cool, I don't care if you're a legacy, or if Yale didn't even have a legacy program. Mitchum could probably buy his way into any school he wanted. Maybe Logan wanted to go to USC. And Mitchum could buy his way in there too, even without being a USC alum. When you have that kind of FU money, you can do whatever you want. Your kid is going to have a leg up, regardless of whether they go to the same school that you did. Your privilege and position will still get them into any good school, or any school for that matter. If you're Mitchum Huntsberger, if you're at that level, people are going to be like, we want that kid because he's going to up our prestige. You're always going to have that problem when that's how you evaluate people in general, not just prospective students. But privilege begets privilege. So as long as there are uber rich people who want their kids to get an education and end up in power or positions of power themselves, I cannot talk today. I'm sorry. But as long as there are people out there like that, legacy admission is just a facade for a much deeper problem that isn't going to be solved by legislating it away. I was watching a video recently. There's a dean of admissions from the University of Michigan Law School who has a really great podcast about law school admissions. And she had a whole episode about this. And she's like, it feels like a sledgehammer for something that needs tiny tools. It's it's something that's not actually going to get the job done, and it's just an overcorrection to something that's not maybe actually that big of a problem. you know if you think about how many people this actually impacts, it's probably not that many. Like, how many people are truly losing out on going to a great school and getting an education that gets them to their career goals because of some rich jerk whose daddy paid his way in? Maybe not that many. I read another article as well that made the case for legacy admissions, and it made a few good points that I think are relevant here. I'm just gonna find it, but it's sort of like, you're not truly competing with those people. You're competing with other people who have your background. They're admitting so many of each kind of person for diversity, and it's not really true. This writer, let me find their name. Okay, so this is an article from Washington Post from last August. It's by Stephen Gerard, who's a professor of philosophy at Williams College. And he says, the great myth, legacy admissions are the enemy of diversity, institutionalizing privilege at everyone else's expense. The surprising truth, legacy admissions do not harm diversity, they enhance it. If the legacy student took the place of a first-generation student, I would light the torches myself. But that's not the way it works. At least at the colleges I'm talking about, no legacy is admitted at the expense of a first-generation student. They're admitted at the expense of other privileged students who have other excellent options. The corporate lawyer's daughter attending the elite Phillips Academy boarding school in Andover, Massachusetts, is not competing against the factory worker son from West Virginia's Charleston High School. She is competing against her equally privileged classmate. And if that classmate is beaten out because the corporate lawyer went to Williams, that classmate will then have to go to another highly selective college, or tragically to a merely selective college. And I think he makes a really good point. A student from a privileged background can always call his uncle or his parents' friends for advice or an internship. He doesn't need the advantage of a highly selective college. Intergenerational loyalty and inheritance of social capital are real, and what is real should count. We sort of touched on this as well when we talked about Rory going to private school, maybe a year and a half ago or something. We had this conversation about how certain communities are at a disadvantage geographically. There's a lot of redlining. There's questions of fairness across the board in America when it comes to who can get a good education, who lives in the right district to go to a charter school, whose parents can afford to send them to private school. And so I think these questions are far broader than just legacy admission. And at the end of the day, Ivy League schools aren't that big. They don't accept that many people. And so even if their numbers of legacies are high compared to elsewhere, or it's a disproportionate admittance rate, I think it's something like 2 to 7 times more likely that you'll get in at a selective school if you're a legacy. But at the end of the day, how many people are disadvantaged by that compared to how many people are just generally disadvantaged by our economic system and by other systems of oppression and economic struggles?
Yeah, and that goes hand in hand with like just the cost of education itself. I mean, you like just any 4-year program now. I don't know, I can't recall exactly what the percentage is offhand, but even between the 50s, 60s, 70s, even going into like the 80s and 90s, the cost of higher education has just shot through the roof in terms of being tenfold, 20-fold. Like it's abhorrent. You'll be in debt for the rest of your life essentially without any sort of assistance or help to just get yourself an education. Even financial aid or scholarships might not even be able to like pay off the brunt of it, and you still may have to take on thousands of dollars of debt, which will take you your entire life to pay off. So there could be so many merit-based students out there who just are, you know, the next astronaut, the next lawyer, the next doctor out there who can bring so much to mankind with their capabilities and with their talents, but who will just never be able to step foot into a classroom and receive that higher education because they're just instantly hit with the stumbling block of, I can't afford this. There's no way for me to make this happen. And now we're in a society, specifically within America, where we just inhibit students so much because we've made it such an improbable reality for them to be able to even consider it or just complete a 4-year program without just plummeting into just a blinding and debilitating debt that you could potentially even die not having paid off. It really just makes me want to like throw up and just be sick about like what we're doing and how much we're inhibiting people from just pursuing educational paths and opportunities that could bring so much to society. So, what do you think about that in terms of what universities can or potentially should be doing in terms of even looking at non legacy students who have all of the grades, all of the merit to be successful and likely would be within their program and within their university, but just don't have funds?
That's exactly the other side of this coin of legacies, is that argument that the donations and the endowments from the legacy students' parents are what is funding the tuition for the disadvantaged. You know, Yale has a needs-based system where if your parents make under a certain threshold, you can just go to school for free. And we see that being a problem in Those Are Strings Pinocchio, when Lorelai having a little extra money in the bank. It doesn't make any sense, but it's for the plot, okay? Her having that extra money from that investment from her dad kicks them out of eligibility for Rory basically getting to go to Yale almost free. And therefore, she has to borrow the money from her rich grandparents so that she doesn't have to go into that kind of crippling debt that most people do. And that's how schools make their money. There are three main funding sources. You have tuition, you have philanthropy, donations from rich alumni, and you have state funding. And private institutions, I don't know that they get any public funds because they're a private institution. And so when it comes to a school like Yale, you have the people who can pay the sticker price subsidizing the people who can't pay the sticker price. And at a lot of other schools, it's far more egalitarian. You're getting money from a bunch of different places, and it's subsidizing as many people as possible. But there are some people whose parents can just write a check and be like, there's your school funding. Harvard apparently can cost upwards of nearly $100,000. Tuition alone being 58, I think, grand, with living expenses, living expenses, textbooks, other fees and associated costs, another 30,000. Just, excuse me? What? So, and there are people who can just pay it. And that's the thing. Those people can go anywhere they want. Whether their parents went to Harvard or Yale or whatever, they can just go to school. And it's their family's donations that make it possible for a lot of deserving kids to go to school. I mean, obviously, there are other ways to solicit donations, and if the practice was ended, it doesn't mean that people will necessarily stop donating. That's the other argument, because there are plenty of schools who have great endowments who never had legacy policies. So it's a whole thing. But again, the question should be, why is this so expensive? Why does it cost $60,000 a year? Exactly why is it worth that much more than a degree from UCLA or Bama? You know, any other school, pick one, name one. Why is there such a disparity between educations and cost and delivery among these places? It feels almost like I was listening to a podcast recently, and someone was talking about Rachel Hollis and saying that she artificially created tiers of tickets for her conference so that people would think they were getting added value and paying more. And then she admitted to them, the people who bought these tickets, she's like, yeah, there's nothing extra for these different tiers. I just artificially created this to see, and you bought it, And I think university is kind of like that, where it's just like, is a Yale education that much better than UChicago or Florida or USC? You still have a lot of great research centers, a lot of great, very educated professors. And that's another place where they're trying to cut costs. Is there's been an increased focus on adjunct professors and contingent contracts with professors so that they can pay them less and exploit their labor more. And yet tuition is just getting more and more expensive, right? So I found this article that said, after adjusting for currency inflation, college tuition has increased 747.8% since 1963. Let that sink in. Nearly 750% in the last 60 years. And we had this conversation when we talked about the generational wars and how Amy was shit talking millennials for not being able to afford anything and just, you should work at Starbucks, sweetie. Like, that's what the rest of us did. This is how we've been screwed. We're paying so much more and we're ending up with this debt, and it's an inescapable cycle for a lot of people. And that to me is probably a bigger problem than the legacy thing. We need to find other ways to make education a priority and to make it affordable for everyone and to make it so that there aren't neighborhoods that are disadvantaged and other neighborhoods that are incredible, because it just continues to draw these lines, literally, that create schisms between the haves and have-nots that make it nearly impossible to bridge the gap of inequality. It's so much deeper and bigger than this very narrow issue. And as much as I'm all for equality and the optics of legacies are terrible, and I really don't think it would be the biggest deal if they ended this practice, I think that it really is just smoke and mirrors. Be like, don't look behind the curtain. Don't look at any of this other stuff. Let's just get rid of legacies and that'll fix the problem. No, it won't. It's so much bigger and deeper and darker and more baked into the ethos of the American way than just, oh, daddy's rich, so I got into Harvard.
Yeah. And it goes hand in hand with like the housing market too, and even the renters market, which is not the focus of this episode, but I feel like it would be wrong not to bring that up either, because the cost of housing, of home ownership, of even just renting your own apartment has skyrocketed probably to a similar percentage in terms of inflation over the decades, where people are even just cutting off their right arm, like their arms left and right, to just make their monthly mortgage payments, to be able to have a roof over their heads. Heaven forbid you start to bring children into the picture. It's like you're just depleting instantly all of your financial resources that are available to you. So what does it say that, again, I'm sure like other nations may have the problem, perhaps not to the extent that America does, but just specifically because we're talking about Rory and they do reside within the United States, what does it say that we're in a society now where we've jacked up the cost of education, of home ownership, of even just being able to rent a living space, where it doesn't even tie in with what a person's monthly income can be to be able to pay all of that off. But then we still expect like success and financial gain, and we look down on people who aren't privileged enough. It's like, well, why aren't they privileged enough? Because again, we're setting up society in a way right now where 99% of us will just never be able to make ends meet and have A, B, and C, and have it all in terms of everything that I just mentioned. So of course there's going to be a dichotomy, like you said, and a schism. I think that's a great word to use, between the have and the have nots. because we've just debilitated a huge chunk of American people from just being able to ever have any of this in any sort of capacity. And it's horrible now that even parents are having to turn around to their children and say, I don't have the resources to give you an education or a higher level education without you going into crippling debt yourself if you so elect to take that on. It's disgusting. I don't know what the immediate solution is because I don't think anybody does. But look at what we've done over the past couple of decades in this country to make this now be our reality. And it's heartbreaking.
It's so true. I mean, it's not going to change the levels of equality in America overnight. Again, if you think about it, higher education is already a rarefied place to be, and the people who come from lower income backgrounds and disadvantaged neighborhoods are already a minority in that class of people. And so if you're kind of disadvantaging the already disadvantaged, you're not going to see a huge market drop off of privilege. You're just going to see more of the same, I think. If you're really interested in equality and academic progress and social mobility, there are many more programs that will have more of an impact across the spectrum than just targeting these fancy schmancy higher education institutions, because they're already a small slice of the population to begin with. So the overall impact will be negligible and probably not noticed, maybe even for generations, because that's what a legacy is, right? We're talking about successive generations of people attending these same schools. And so you're really not going to notice much in any appreciable way that makes life better for the current have-nots, unless other aspects of inequality are more imminently taken care of by the government that's supposed to be there to serve us. So, just saying.
Yeah, I mean, and you've already kind of partially answered the question, but in the decades to come, it doesn't seem like I wish it was going to get better, but it seems like we're still just on an up curve with just tuition costs continuing to skyrocket for college and university to just continue to become like a cesspool of inaffordability for so many people. Salaries and labor forces are not meeting inflation in terms of, again, housing costs, the cost of education, of tuition, of even just food and groceries and basic necessities. But specifically as it relates to education, if we were to course correct within the next few decades, if we even can, what does that look like? What needs to change and what needs to happen moving forward for this to start getting better, and even maybe hit like the reset button to making it more affordable, like it was perhaps in the 50s and 60s for people, without breaking the bank or going into, again, lifelong debt to do it? What needs to change and what can change, if anything?
I mean, I wish I had that answer. I don't even know that the economic policy analysts have that answer. Especially because a lot of schools have started increasing the service level, shall we say, in terms of having more amenities on campus, having a well-staffed school, to have, you know, a robust medical establishment and therapy for students and great sports programs and co-ed, what do you call them, like extracurricular kind of stuff, rec leagues and nice facilities. All of those kinds of things all add up, shall we say. And schools are already tax exempt as well. So they're already kind of not having to deal with that. And so it's like, where is all the money going? And you have to pay people with PhDs and postdocs and other very high levels of education who have themselves devoted life to higher education and the pursuit of knowledge and the noble profession of teaching the next generations. They deserve to be fairly compensated for their work, but how does that come at the cost to students? It's a very complex question that most people don't really have an answer to. I wish I knew more about it, but a lot of these figures and these issues are opaque to us because a lot of this isn't public information, or it's kind of the only kind of question that's, or a question that's only dealt with in a think tank somewhere, and despite my political science degree and a handful of economics courses, I don't have all of the answers to this problem. But I don't think that ending legacy admissions is the answer. It might be one component of a move towards equity and diversity, but it can't be the end of the conversation about how to make education more affordable. And I mean, Biden was looking at erasing the debt. I think, if my brain is working properly, which I don't think it is tonight, I think I saw a figure 1.6 trillion in student debt. And he was going to write off 39 billion of it, something like that. So still kind of a drop in the bucket. Really, it's just chump change, but could make a very real difference in the lives of each student who has that burden lifted off of them. But like I said, states are kind of pulling back on how much they're putting into education, and subsidies are being cut. It comes down to a lot of economic policy levers that work in very specific and strategic and difficult ways to move the needle in any direction. And so it's a really, really hard question to answer because, the communist in me wants to say, just make it all publicly funded. Europeans do it. There are a lot of schools in Europe where you don't have to pay tuition, right? So if they can fund entirely free higher education institutions that are well regarded, why can't we? But one, your backward country will never get on board with that. They'll be like, no, you need to bootstrap your way to an education because you don't just get one. Who said you just get an education? We don't need it. You should have to earn that. And two, just the concepts you guys have about small government and neoliberalism and trickle-down economics and all of that. Reagan messed you up. It doesn't work. Trickle-down economics is not a thing. The rich are not going to save you. You need more oversight and more public funds going into things and more accountability to someone higher than yourself for your expenditures in order to see more affordable college. But I mean, again, look at Canada. We're almost entirely public. And my university, while being quite expensive because I moved out of province and had to finance a lot of my living expenses, it was a fraction of what you pay at fancy schools in the States because it's public. There's a lot of good loan programs. There's a lot of subsidy. There's a lot of grants. There's a lot of public money pumped into education in my country. It's not as robust as in a lot of European countries, but we're a little closer to you guys than we are to them, ideologically speaking. And we do it just fine up here. And even in the States, in-state, out-of-state, public-private, public education is a fraction of the cost. And there are still some excellent public institutions that pump out great, brilliant minds. And yet, the end-all be-all for success and political power and all of that seems to be these private institutions that are only accessible to an elite class of people. And nobody seems to recognize the problems with that and how maybe, public institutions and subsidized tuition is a way out of this for all of us instead of just the people who can afford it. That was a heck of a rant. Sorry.
No, it's okay. And I just want to follow up with one of, I think, is like one of my favorite quotes surrounding this entire issue, which there are so many. And I also just, we're not going to like get to her, but I will just say, I also just want to very quickly shout out like Malala for what she's done for like educational reform and just trying to like instill this concept that like education is something that is deserved by all, that it should be an inherent and basic right. So, go look her up, read her book if you haven't, because she's done really groundbreaking work there as well. But it just made me circle back to, again, was I think one of the most prevalent quotes that surrounds what we're talking about tonight. And it's from Kofi Annan, surprise, surprise, which is, education is a human right with immense power to transform. On its foundation rests the cornerstones of freedom, democracy, and sustainable human development. Give everyone a chance because they have so much to bring to the table. This should not be a privilege. It should be a right that is afforded to all because it will just better mankind. And I think that's what Kofi was trying to say with that statement, but he just alluded to it far better than I ever could. Everybody deserves higher education, as much education as they can possibly receive in their lifetime. If you wanted to go to school until you're 90, do it. Like, what you can learn and then what you can put forth with the knowledge that you gain from any education is just staggering. So I just wanted to also highlight that quote as well because it really spoke to me on a lot of different levels.
That is brilliant. We like Kofi Annan for a reason, you know? He's just okay.
Yeah, right.
But that's exactly it. A rising tide raises all ships, right? So if everybody has more opportunity, everybody is able to achieve more, innovate more, attain more. And it won't be, you know, just the rich subsidizing stuff for the poor, or like everybody does better when we're more educated. It's just been shown to be the case in every other developed nation, right? So the fact that the United States is so far behind other countries on this, despite being one of the richest in the world, there's just no real excuse for it, except, ironically, stupidity and, you know, certain brands of conservatism that hold back these these educational progressions, and just these silly ideas about the Protestant work ethic and the wealth in general and how it all comes into play in how people interact in the US and how people treat each other based on that, what people think you deserve based on your economic status, because there's this backwards ass assumption that people who are poor are there by their own acts or lack thereof. You know, you're poor because you're stupid. You didn't manage your money properly. You don't work hard enough. And that has been shown to not be the case time after time after time. And so if we just sort of walk that back and understand that that's not how things work, and we start to push for reforms that will actively improve people's standard of living and their access to education, their ability to meaningfully participate in the workforce, there will be more money. That's how civilization has advanced to where it has. The development of nations has rested upon education and innovation. And you can innovate more when you have more smart people. When you have people who are barely finishing high school, you have the opposite. You have people who believe in UFOs, and you have conspiracy theorists and extremists and people who just don't understand the issues they get up on a soapbox about. And not naming any names, but that's kind of how we got here.
Yeah. I do have one final Gigi related question that I want to pose to you as we wrap this one up. But do you have any final thoughts before I circle us back and just ask what I think is going to be the final thought and question I want to posit to you this evening.
I just want to make a quick comment about Paris, because she's another legacy student that we haven't really talked about in any detail yet. There are varying accounts of how many generations of her family have gone to Harvard, anywhere between 5 and 10, apparently. But her not getting into Harvard and following that legacy was devastating to her. But she still ended up at Yale because she still had all of the advantages that could have gotten her into Harvard if her interview had gone a little better. Perhaps, her intensity was not what they were looking for, and the fact that she was a Harvard legacy probably was still attractive to other schools. She was a prime candidate because of that breeding, shall we say. And she went to Yale, which is still a great school. She ended up getting into multiple of the top programs in the country for both law and medicine at the end of it all. She really proved her merit. She worked her butt off to get there. And it just goes to show that you don't always have to follow in the footsteps of your family to wind up at a great school with great education. I mean, obviously, Paris is maybe a bit of an outlier because she still got into multiple Ivies, and not everybody has that privilege either. But I just thought she was an interesting case study because she, along with Logan, are the proof in the pudding that coming from any Ivy background is going to be beneficial and is going to give you a leg up and is going to give you a sort of belief system about education and its place in your life and in the world, and how you're going to chase after your goals is going to flow from that.
Yeah, I concur. And Paris is a great example. We didn't talk about her as much as we could have, but we will also have more follow-up episodes down the line, just specifically talking about Paris and her accomplishments and her achievements. So I know we can circle back to a lot of that then, and we will. One of the last questions that I wanted to pose to you, and it kind of goes hand in hand with Paris anyway, but specifically with Rory, we can also tie in Paris, Logan, any other student that made use of this. Should we be condemning or judging Rory and these other students for, calling in their legacy and making use of, I think I saw this as an example of someone saying, like, it's like having like a fast pass to like cut in the front of the line at Disney, which is a great metaphor. But should we be judging Rory or other students for taking advantage of this when it was something that was just inherently already there before they were even born? Or should we just be a little bit more accepting of the fact that, like, they're just making use of what they can to better their own livelihood? Where do you fall on that?
It's such a nuanced question because there are some people who maybe cash in on privilege and don't live up to it. Rory, I don't think, is one of those people. I think she does work harder than the average person, and she does have quite a bit of talent. And Mitchum even says it to her when he offers her the internship, like, this is being handed to you. It's an opportunity. What are you going to do with it? And the whole idea of the American dream is to provide opportunity to people for merit to rule the day and for anyone to believe it's possible to better their circumstance and to live the dream. And so to judge people who actually take opportunities, whether they come from privilege or not, is somewhat hypocritical on that front, because the whole idea is for everybody to somewhat be rich and comfortable and successful. Obviously, in capitalism, the whole premise is that labor creates the value, and it's the people at the top who reap the most benefit from that labor and that value. And so there has to be an exploited underclass for the uber capitalists to get that rich, right? And so that's not what we want. But that doesn't mean that opportunity is something that we shouldn't seize, because it's still a net positive, hopefully, for both us personally and possibly for society at large, if we can find a way to contribute and be deserving of that opportunity. To take it and to squander it is not the best, at least especially on purpose. Things happen in life where maybe you can't achieve everything you ever hoped, but that doesn't mean that you weren't deserving of the opportunity. And if anything, I think more people should be given more opportunity, and that we shouldn't harp on the people who take the opportunities that they have because they were born into some sort of privilege, because it's not their fault that they have privilege. They didn't decide to be born that way. They didn't necessarily choose their lot in life. We need to go after the systems and the people who keep those systems in place to keep everybody down, because that's the real problem.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. I don't think I could have said it better myself, so I'm not even going to try to.
Yeah, I am finally putting my political science degree to some use with this podcast. It's just, ranting about equality. And, I've taken courses on macroeconomic policy and Scandinavian welfare state and public policy, international politics, all of these kinds of things. And it all kind of leads me to this conclusion of, like, it's the system, guys. It's not individual people who are making individual choices about where to go to school based on emotional decisions because of what their parents said. A lot of people follow in their parents' footsteps. Sometimes it's following them to an Ivy League school. Sometimes it's taking over the small family business, right? Or taking over the family farm, something a little more humble. There are more decision factors that go into it than just, well, I'm rich and privileged, so I'm going to go to an Ivy League school. And it's a little simplistic to assume that that's the case only for the rich and privileged.
Yeah, I agree. And I will just echo what you said. This isn't a legacy issue. I mean, it's just a small pebble, I think, amongst a sea of like very large rocks that are potentially just really grave systemic issues that have been around for decades and decades and decades. I hope that we can try and make them better. But it's not going to be an overnight thing. There's a lot of work that has to be done here. The economy needs to get better. Inflation needs to get better. And then I think if it can, more opportunities will be able to be afforded to people without having to consider legacy and social status and financial status, and we can kind of get back more on like a level sort of playing ground. Again, it's hard to even encapsulate what the answer to this is, because there's not one, there's several. And maybe getting rid of legacies is just one small step in that direction, but there's a lot of work that has to be done here. I will just also say, like, I don't think that we should be judging Rory, Logan, or Paris for trying to just better their own livelihoods by making use of opportunities and gains that are available to them, nor should I think that we should be judging any person really who does that when their motives are wholesome. If you're obviously just trying to do it because you're a jerk who just wants the privilege, but you don't actually end up making use of your education in any sort of positive way, that's really detrimental. And now you've taken an opportunity from somebody who could have really made a difference in life. That's a whole different thing. But on the whole, I just think that we need to be doing better with just curtailing excessive privilege when it stems from a misuse of that privilege for personal gain and not for the betterment of like society on the whole.
I agree. It's not just about privilege, it's what you do with that privilege and how you engage with the world. Are you an uptight elitist asshole, or are you actively out there doing good things with your money and with your position? Because there are plenty of rich people who do a lot of good. So it's not an unqualified evil to be rich and privileged. I think that's way too simplified. And another thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that legacies don't just happen at Ivies, you know? Maybe you want to go to the same community college or the same state college as your parent, the same liberal arts school. It doesn't just impact the wealthy. It's not as much of a leg up perhaps at institutions like that. And so that's not where the problem lies from a societal perspective. But just saying across the board, selecting a college based on the fact that your parents went there, or being given some sort of preference because your parent went there, it just feels like a blunt instrument for something that doesn't really need it. There are any number of factors that go into a decision about where to go to school, and legacy is but one. And it's not as cut and dry as some of these articles are arguing. You know, there's a lot of politics and posturing involved in all of it. And I think that the true answer lies, one, somewhere in the middle, and two, with the systems. I'm just going to keep saying it. It's the systems that are further entrenching the inequality. It's just not going to work. You can't fix inequality with one tiny little policy change or legislation in a handful of states against legacy admissions. It's way too small of an issue. I think the number of people affected by this is it's nowhere near as big of a problem as people are making it out to be. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else that you would like to add to this episode before we wind us down and close this one out?
No, I think my working memory is clearly exhausted here. This is one of those episodes that required a lot of research and scripting, and there's a lot of numbers and quotes and stuff. And my brain always short fuses a little faster with ones like that. But I made it. Here we are. Let's wrap it up.
Hooray. We did the thing. Another one in the books, guys. We hope that you have enjoyed this conversation. If you have any thoughts on anything that we've said, whether you agree or disagree, we'd love to hear anything that you have to say. Drop us a comment and let us know where you stand. If you have any suggestions on legacies within universities, whether you're yay or nay, again, we'd love to hear what your thoughts and your hot takes are on this issue. So drop us a comment and let us know. If you're starved for more GG content, we are now about 5 to 6 weeks out from a little something. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Have you heard the good word about the FanFest Society event happening in Guilford, Connecticut, October 18th to 20th? It's a beautiful convention-like setting hosted in idyllic coastal Connecticut that brings together 10 cast and crew members and just some of the best Gilmore fans from around the world that you could ever meet. We're not sure of the status of tickets at the moment, but if there are any left, do not hesitate to get yours because you will not regret it. It's amazing. And keep an eye on the Facebook group. We have links to everything in the description below, to the website to get tickets and to the Facebook group, because there you will find, again, this beautiful community that Jenny and Marcus have built over the last 8 years or 9 years. People who are willing and able to help you find a roommate, find a ride from the airport, get you here some way, shape, or form, give you tips and tricks. All of the information you need is there. And sometimes if there are people whose travel plans have to change last minute, you might also be able to snag tickets there if they happen to be gone already. So just keep an eye on the social media and the Facebook group. It's a treasure trove of information. And if you have other questions, you can also come to us anytime. But we really hope to see you there. There's going to be some great panels this year, some great guests and podcasters. We're going to be running Gilmore's Against Humanity again. It is ready to go. We are not sleeping on it. Like last year, we were sliding into home doing it the night before, and this time we are on it. We have made some upgrades and improvements. It's going to be better than ever. And we're also running a Yale's panel. Very excited to talk to the cast and crew who were involved in the Yale years. So it's just going to be the best weekend of Gilmore goodness you could ever hope for. So please join us for that if you can. We look forward to seeing everybody and meeting you if you're new. Just do not sleep on this, guys.
Yeah, again, links to all of that are in the description below. You can visit the website to purchase a ticket and check out those social media sites for additional info. In the meantime, if you want more content, go back and watch some of our old videos. We have a lot of really great stuff in our backlog that I think you would enjoy, no matter what topic you're looking for a little more info on, whether it's education, financial privilege, motherhood, fatherhood, children, XYZ, you name it. We've probably already talked about it. And we still have so much more that we're thinking about doing in the future. So we hope that you'll continue to stay with us and join us for those episodes too. In the meantime, please remember to always do those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It is one click below, and it really does help us out. And we cannot tell you how immensely grateful we always are for any support that we're given.
Yes, if you stuck it out through my stumbling over my words tonight, thank you so much. We hope that you'll come back and watch me fumble it again next week. So,
hey, football.
Hey, it's football season, guys. We're so excited. The tailgating is imminent.
Yes. Yes. So fumbles in football, but not with us because we know what's up.
Yeah. For all the preparation I do, just the fumbling over words and being like, what was the point I wanted to make here? Just my brain is too full. There's too much in there. And
okay, Rory.
It's just not coming out very well.
Okay.
So,
well, go read a book.
Yeah, that'll help the information overload. That's how that works.
Yeah, exactly. In the meantime, again, thank you for staying with us. And we will see you next Friday night for dinner.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.